Here we're looking at a basic RAW file which I've just opened up into Camera Raw so we can see it a decent size. But when we look at the picture, it doesn't have a great deal of impact or appeal, does it? And I think it's all down to two main reasons. The colour balance of this image is just not very pleasant at all, because it was shot as the sun was going down. We're well into the golden hour here, but we're not facing the west here, so we get to see the sunset. We're facing the east. The exposure has taken on a blue bias that we often see in our images in these types of conditions. It's all due, of course, to the wavelength of blue light being shorter, but the good news is we can adjust for that. The overall image also looks insipid, pale and weak, and that coupled with the blue colour is really enough to take away most of the appeal. But when we look more carefully, we can see that the composition works on a number of levels. Now I've opened up the image in Photoshop so I can just put the crop overlay over the top, and the one thing we notice straight away is the rule of thirds is near perfect for us, with that top third line on the horizon and where the lines cross on the left hand side over here we've got the strongest part of the image with that rock forming a peak. We can use the O key to look at different ways of viewing composition, and this one I think is called, in fact I can't remember what it's called, this one's called diagonal, and even that works up to a point. If I hit the O key, there's the next one which was called diagonal. Let's have another look. Triangle. This one also works quite well with the line following the rock and this one up the beach. Touching the O key again, we've got a different rule of thirds, but we're not too far off of that, so that works. But the one I really wanted to look at was this one, because you can see that with this rule of composition the image is working nicely with this too, because we can come down the beach around and stop at that solid rock. Now we also have a degree of power in the image from the break-in waves, but that also gives us a little bit of a problem, because we're going to need to adjust the tones in the sky, and the break-in wave is going to be affected by that. But we can deal with that in Camera Raw, but we need to be patient and subtle. Now if we do work carefully and subtly with those tools in Camera Raw, we can produce something like this. A massive difference, but really made up with a number of small steps to bring the image back much closer to what inspired me to take the picture in the first place. With the image open up in Camera Raw, where do we start? Well, I think in a familiar place. We need to go to the options for our lens corrections, and certainly I want to remove chromatic aberration, and generally I would also tick the box to enable the profile corrections, and as I do that you can see the little pop. You'll notice that on the lens that I'm using here, the Canon 16-35, if you look down at the bottom left corner for example, as I tick that box you can see that corner lightens, and in fact if you look at the other corners you'll see the same there. So although I like to fix the distortion, I'm quite keen on not having weak areas around the edge. So one of the options we have, I must admit I don't use it greatly myself, but I keep wondering whether I should use it more. For example, if we go to the Effects tab, we've got Post-Crop Vignetting. So I could put a little bit of a vignette around the edge even before I start the manipulation. We'll do that here and just remember we've got it there just in case we feel a little bit later that we don't need it, but at the moment it looks fine. So I'm going to go back to my basic tab, because one of the big issues with this image is the color balance. It's just terrible. So I suppose what I want to do here first is to try to get the colour balance much closer to what inspired me to raise my camera to my eye in the first place, and it certainly didn't look as cold and uninspiring as this. Now I'm going to use the eyedropper tool up at the top left of the screen, and I find this is a great tool for fixing the colour balance. One of the things I notice in my own camera club is quite often we get an image like this and the author then cranks up the colour because the sky needs colour, but look what happens to the sea. Now I saw something in our camera club only last month that was actually worse than that, and for once the judge did pick up on the fact that there was something badly wrong with the colour balance, and I think all the author did was cranked up the vibrance which the picture needed, but allowing that to take the blues too far was a mistake. Well, we can avoid that here. Let's double click to reset that. If we go up to the option and select it, what I need to do with the eyedropper selected is to look for an area in the image which should be a neutral colour. So if you look at the blues in the water that's tipping over here, perhaps I could start here. Doesn't matter if we don't get this perfect first time. Let me just click once and look at the difference that it makes. Straight away the water comes up white and looks better. The overall effect is much warmer, which is what you would expect. The sun's going down behind me and it's now so low that it's reflecting right over the clouds, and we're seeing the effect of it way out in the east. So now I want to add more impact into my image and more colour. But if you look up at the top right of the screen, you can see the histogram actually looks extremely healthy, which is a good thing. So I'm going to start off by increasing the clarity, bringing it up quite a bit. I'm going to bring up the vibrance quite a lot too, because I think we can do that. Now you can see the difference with what we did a little while ago. It's not having that horrible effect in the water turning blue, because we've corrected the colour balance. Even if I take it up to its maximum, we can squeeze a lot of warmth into here, but we're not actually doing any damage at all to those white tones, which is a good thing. I'm going to back away from that just a little bit, but maybe I'm going to try a little bit of saturation as well. I just want it to come up a little bit. Something like that is looking quite attractive to me in the foreground. Maybe I'd like to do something with the greens here, but I don't want to affect anything else. Well, I wouldn't want to do that using the tint. So this is where I may turn to the option called Hue, Saturation and Luminance. We get 3 tabs here. The one I'm looking for is Saturation. So I can select Saturation and maybe just increase the colour in the green of the water just where it's breaking to add that little bit of extra impact. The main thing I want to do though is to deal with that sky next. So let's go back to the basic tab. I'm going to use a graduated filter. You can see a little bit of a spot there. Perhaps we should deal with that first. Let's pick up our healing brush, and if you go down at the bottom right and tick the box to visualize spots, we can adjust it, and I can see where the spots are. They're not too many actually, which is good news. Just that one up there. There's nothing else I think that really shows up as a spot. There was a spot on the sand here, but I'll deal with that a little bit later. So what I was about to do was to select the graduated filter, and I want to drag that down from the top to give a bit of power. Now I'm going to reset what's inside that bounding box there by right clicking and resetting the local settings. I'm going to hit the V key just to hide the bounding box. I always like to do that. It clears it from my eye line and I can concentrate on what I'm doing, because I just want to bring down the tonal range there, but I don't want to increase the colour. In fact, I think we've got a little bit of danger of having a wee bit too much colour in the sky, because there's nothing worse than a seascape or landscape where the colours are unnatural, in my view. So if I back off the saturation, I may be able to squeeze a bit more in tone. And I can also look maybe even at a bit of clarity there. Maybe look at a little bit of dehaze. You can see it's all having an effect. But the problem we have now is we're getting evidence of our work because it's darkening the top of that nice wave that's broken high over that rock, and we could possibly even see some effect up here. So I'm going to try and fix those things, and I'm going to start with the wave right in the center. Now I think this area needs to be much bigger on screen, so let's pick up the zoom tool, and I'm just going to zoom in. I don't want it too big because I need to see around the area. I think that's okay. I'm just touching the space bar here, and you'll notice the zoom tool turns to the hand, which enables me to drag this down. So I just want to do something here. So what I'm going to do is, rather than do what I often do, is to open this up as a smart object, make a copy, and then adjust the second copy and mask it through. We can do that directly in Camera Raw here, and if you was a Lightroom user, you've got the same options that I'm about to use. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've zoomed out again after zooming in on that wave because I need to bring my graduated filter back live. Now I can touch the V key and we can see the bounding box. Because I'm stopping and starting recording a video, I've lost the selection on this, but of course we can just liven this up by clicking the pin. But I need this to be live to do what I'm about to do next. So zooming back in on that area and bringing it down just a little bit. If we go up here, I can select a brush, and when I select a brush I get the opportunity to add or subtract, and what we're going to do here is subtract from the graduated filter. Now the way I usually work with this tool, if I'm going to use it, is to have it very, very low with regards to the flow. So I'm quite happy for the feather to be up quite high. The size, we can control that with the square bracket keys, but the flow, I need it to be super delicate. I'm going to try 2 to start with, because you can see the graying of the water there, but if we're not careful, you'll see the effect of our work around. So let's see if I've got this about right, just to start painting over that area. Now it's starting to raise in tone because I'm starting to remove the effect of the graduated filter just in that local area. But what I find often works better is once I've done the worst of it, so that let's do the worst of it. So what I'm suggesting here is I'm not encroaching into the surrounding sky here. So here I'm just bringing it up a little bit at a time, and I'm being very, very careful. Although it's a bit like using a layer mask, because you probably notice you can always add. So if I feel I've gone a bit too far, I can undo what I've just done. But sometimes to get these things to be more believable, I find it's sometimes best to make a very big brush, maybe even drop the flow rate down to even less, and then I start to do a bit of work, and although that work is encroaching into the sky, it's being done so delicately and gradually that we hardly notice it, if at all. But again, we have to be subtle and be aware that if we do overdo it, we can always back away. But there, I think I've lightened that to about what I can expect. We've got clunks of water here which is blocking the light from coming through, so we're going to have a little bit of shape to it. Let me hit Control 0 and we'll take a look. I'll just touch the V key. Now I think that's okay. I'm going to touch the V key to bring it back, and I'll click to liven it up. I need to go back to my edit here, that's right, and then back to my brush, because what I want to do now is have a look over here. I'm going to do much the same. I'll need to zoom in a bit because we're a little bit too far off, something like that. So I'm just going to do a bit of work along the edge, because there's nothing worse than having a halo, and we see that quite often too. So take off the effect, the worst of the effect, but then I'm going to make my brush big again, and remember I've got that flow rate really low. Now I'm going to bridge the two. I need to be careful again, but I feel I don't want to go too near the edge. I'm quite happy for that edge there to be slightly darker. If it wasn't, I'd probably be darkening it later on anyway. Now I think probably the flow of one is a bit light here. It is working, but you may have difficulty in seeing it, so I'll just push it up a bit, take a little bit more off, hit Control 0. You can see though that I have lost that little bit of shading on the top of that heel, which would have been a dead giveaway that some shading of the sky had been done. So I'm reasonably happy with that. Let's look at the foreground, because I want this to have more density. A couple of marks around here I'll deal with a little bit later, but we can deal with them here. In fact, why don't we do that? Let's just zoom in on those areas. I'm going to do a little bit of work here using my healing brush. I think I've said this on one of the other videos. I quite often touch the V key here as well and hide the bounding box, so that when I actually click on the picture, I can see instantly if it's going to do a good job or not. I'm not prevented from seeing something by, and it's not working, no, it's working a little bit slow at the moment, but I can see the change and I can evaluate the change without any problem. Now I've said before that I'm not working with a state-of-the-art computer, but when I draw over this area, it doesn't usually take that length of time to effect a repair. So something is holding my computer up a little bit. So what I'm going to do in this situation is to see if I can get around some of those little foibles we have to deal with by maybe just clicking Done. Because although it all disappears from the screen and Camera Raw closes down, of course everything we've done is safe within our thumbnail. So I can reopen it up. Let's see if that's cleared the problem just a little bit. Let's try something else. What have I got down here? I've got a little bit of a smudge there. Look, let's try that, and we can just test this to see if that did any good. And make my brush bigger to cover that. A little bit quicker, but not much. But there we go. It is working, and we're getting all of those little spots and blemishes fixed. But what I was about to say before I started those is I want to do something in the bottom here. We've got a diagonal line, so I think it's a job again for a graduated filter. Click and drag, ignore the effect it's having for the reasons I've said a few times now. Right click inside the bounding box and reset it. Touch the V key. Now I can just drop it down just to hold the corner in. Maybe just a little more saturation, a little warmth to. In fact, I think I would have a little bit down there as well. Let's just bring that up. It's odd when you do this without the bounding box, I know, but there it is. It's there. You get used to working with and without it after a while, and perhaps I could squeeze a bit more warmth there. So you can see that's looking quite good. The only two things that I really should have dealt with at the time of shooting were these rocks down here, but to be honest, I think they're going to be easier to take out with either Content Aware in Photoshop or even the Spot Healing brush. So I think for a moment this is a timeout situation. I'm going to touch my H key to come away from the settings we had, and I think it's time to sit back and just evaluate what we've done. Is there anything we need to do before we open this up into Photoshop? I'm a firm believer in what makes an image is a series of small steps. I suppose the biggest step we made here was the color balance. That made its biggest change, but then the rest are small steps, and we don't hardly notice the small steps until we see them all added together. There's one or two small steps I'd like to take. I think perhaps I could add just a little more darkness at the top of the sky, so I could add another graduated filter. I don't want to add colour into this, I just want to add a little bit of density at the top. So once again, right click, reset, touch the V key to get rid of all of those, and all I want is just a little bit of exposure down, just to hold it in a wee bit more. And right on the edge here we've got some tones there which I'd like to just bring in a little bit, and I'll do that with my brush. I think as soon as I select the brush, I'm looking over at the settings on the right hand side. The exposure is down a little bit. I'll bring my brush down because all I want to do, and let's have a look at the settings I've got here. The flow rate here, look, is very low, so just a little bit on the edge. Maybe we'll notice it more here. See the tones just going down, so we're held in. A very critical look around the image. Is there anything else I'd like to do? I don't think so. I'm happy with the whiteness of the water. There is, I suppose, a couple of grey areas. There's a little grey area there, but it's almost insignificant. And I'm wondering if I could just whiten the water a little bit in isolated places. I don't know. Well, why don't we test it and see? I'm going to go and add a new adjustment brush here. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see the sort of greyness or the discoloration that I'm looking for. Some of this may be sand kicked up from the bottom of the wave, but let's see. First thing I want to do is just paint on there a little bit, but of course it's going the wrong way. It's going for underexposure, so I'll double click to reset that. Maybe I could brighten the highlights a little bit and a little bit of exposure. And now we can do what we did before. Drop the brush down and just wipe across. Have a look. I'll go with the way the waves are coming in, I think. Not sure what happened there. Let's hit Control Z to bring that back. I think I dragged the whole thing away. You can see there is a tendency here to want to rush this. And even here I'm conscious of recording a video, so part of me wants to go over there and increase the flow, but I know it will be a mistake if I do it. So I'm going to stay with it, and you can, I think I've done enough for you to see how subtle we often need to be when we're just trying to lift subtle tones. Look at those along here. We could possibly do something there too, just to lighten the waves as they're cresting, just adding a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of a mark there which I'll need to take off, but you can see that we're beginning to get there. Now I've spent 3 or 4 minutes just going around little areas, just raising the light tones here. You can see it's being changed very subtly around the edge, but I think it's well worth the effort. So after working around all of these areas, I'm just increasing the sparkle in strategic areas. And if I hit Control 0, I've done quite a bit of work around here. When I say quite a bit of work, I was taking about 3 or 4 minutes to gradually lighten the wave, and all of the greyness of that wave has now gone, but we've not gone so far that we've done any damage to the tones. And I think I'm ready to open this up as a virtual completed image in Photoshop. There's just a couple of things I think we could do just to improve it marginally, but we've done practically all of the work in Camera Raw. Remember, with previous videos I've been working with a smart object, but here, although we had the smart object option turned on, we didn't need it because we've done all of the work in Camera Raw. So as soon as the image opened, I used the options at the top right to flatten the image, which reapplies the background lock. Now it would be nice if I could do something with that bit of blue sky up on the top left. Now I think Content Aware will deal with that for us pretty easily, so I'm going to select my lasso tool, make an irregular selection around that area, and because I'm working with a locked layer on the right hand side in layers, I can apply this by hitting the delete key rather than edit fill. The fill box will appear and it's got Content Aware from the last time I used it, so click OK. That looks pretty good. Let's get rid of the selection with Control D. I think I'm pretty happy with that, although if I pick up my spot healing brush, maybe there's just a little mark there I'd like to just touch, but apart from that I'm happy with that. But I did mention these two areas down at the bottom. I'll zoom into those because they're just neither in or out. Now with my spot healing brush still selected, and the brush is about the right size too, I'm going to have a go at this. Just going to paint over that area, and I'll live with that. And again, just here, and I'll live with that with just a touch. Control 0. Now's the time to have another one of those timeouts. What I'm also going to do, I'm going to give this image a bit more of a panoramic look. I've demonstrated this a number of times, and I've also looked carefully to make sure that I'm not doing any quality damage to my image while doing it. But if I go to Image and Image Size, I'm going to add a degree of width but no height. So I'm going to unlink the width and height. So here I'm going to increase the width about 400 pixels. Let's choose 600 pixels, 6,000 pixels I should say. When I click OK, you'll notice the stretching of the image. Let me lock away my layers, and there we can see the effect. And finally, a little bit of sponge, set to saturate, 20%, that should be okay. Big brush, just going to increase the oh no, that's a little bit too much, 10%. I was going to say I just want to increase the saturation along there a little bit. I don't want it to be too noticeable. That's good. And maybe I'll drop the brush down and just tweak up the green just a little bit. And there we have our completed image, I think. Just one more thing I'd like to try with my freehand lasso tool selected. Just want to make an irregular shape around here. That looks okay. I'm going to inverse that. I'm going to use shortcuts, Control, Shift, I, and I'm going to go to Select and Mask to feather the edge. And I'm working on a high-res picture, so I'm going to go to 400, whoops, not 4,000, 400 pixels or 400%. I'll hide it, Control H, bring up my levels, Control L, and just look at a tiny little tweak of the mid-tone. And then preview. And if I think it's worth having, I'll take it. Maybe it's not. Bring it back a little bit. You can see I'm being really subtle here, a little bit perhaps, but I think it wouldn't notice whether I did it or I didn't. Control D will remove that hidden selection, There we have the image.